Well, I'm David Sveen, and this is Dr. Scott Moreau, who is Professor of Intercultural Studies and Missions, and the Dean of the Wheaton College Graduate School, and a fellow colleague. It's good to be here with you, Scott.
Good to be here with you, Dave.
Well, we got a few questions we want to go through today as it pertains to cross-cultural missions and ministry, and we'll start right in with question number one. In your years of preparing cross-cultural missionaries and studying missiology, what would you say are the key elements to preparing Christians for effective cross-cultural missions?
I'm going to narrow the question down a little bit because if I'm preparing a Christian from Kazakhstan, as I am right now, it's a different framework that I need to use than if I'm preparing Americans to go overseas. And so I'll focus on what is it preparing American Christians to go into missions overseas. And I would say the biggest missing piece for Americans is really understanding culture, and not just in the theoretical sense, but how culture impacts daily life. From little things like decisions of what I want to eat for breakfast, to big things, how to close a deal, whether it's a deal on a major sale or it's a deal on purchasing church property, or whether it's a huge ministry decision that needs to be made. Culture is part of the atmosphere we breathe. And a lot of Americans aren't used to the idea that I go overseas and I have to understand their culture well enough to know how to become part of it. And I would add to that, the more practical something is, the more likely it's deeply tied to culture. And so we tend to come up, we're great at 7 steps to, 5 keys to, and you'll find book titles like that all over the place. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it does give us this framework. Oh, if I just walk through these steps, then everything will be okay.
Sure.
If I just do these 5 spiritual principles, life is good.
And how often does that work, that they follow the 5 steps and they have success?
And they're successful, right. Well, and it might work here, in the United States.
Yes.
But cross-culturally,
It doesn't.
it doesn't necessarily. Sometimes it will, and you can be a bull in a china shop and get your way and think you're being successful, but you don't understand the culture.
Sure.
I think I confess, Dave, one of my biggest frustrations is that when a believer who wants to become a missionary often asks an agency, what training should I get? And commonly the answer is Bible training. And please understand, I'm not dissing Bible training in any way, shape, or form, but people can go really well grounded in the Bible and completely miss culture. Whereas if they're well grounded in culture, they can go to the scripture and learn and grow and develop from there.
Sure.
And I think sometimes we mistake theology for cultural relevance. And as a missiologist, of course I'm upset with that. But that's the type of thing I think we do miss out on. How are we preparing people to do well in another culture?
And work those cultures well and be successful. So what are the most common obstacles or limitations that prevent missionaries from being effective cross-culturally?
Assuming my way is right. Assuming I know the answer, assuming there aren't local cultural resources. But I would say if there's a huge thing that's come up in the last 25 years, it's the availability of all of your emotional resources back home to come with you electronically. So when I first went to Swaziland 30 some odd years ago, I arrived and I had no emotional support from home. And it's not that my parents didn't care or friends didn't care, sure they did, but I had to write them a letter and then it would take a month to get a turnaround. So if I didn't develop emotional roots deep in the setting, I was without any emotional stability or roots. Today, when young adults head internationally, mom and dad, and I'm one of those because I've got adult children, I expect to be Skyping with them weekly. I expect that I might be FaceTiming with them. They're going to keep me up to date with Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, everything else. And part of the challenge for this generation, especially the next generation of cross-cultural workers, is then there's a temptation not to rely on the national church to provide emotional roots for them. And the other temptation that's a counterpart, more of my generation, is I connect well with people like you. And that means if I go overseas and you happen to be there, then I'll connect well with you, and you're going to meet my deepest needs as a friend.
As a fellow national.
As a fellow national, and we can form missionary ghettos
Yep.
where people are together. I don't see that as much with this generation, but I also don't see them necessarily, now they've got even deeper emotional ties that can be maintained via instant access.
Yep.
And they have less motivation. And to me, one of the damaging things that can happen in that is the national church learns you don't have needs. And you give them a model of a missionary who's not tied into the local setting, who's perhaps distant and doesn't reveal weaknesses and vulnerability, and they know you have them because they see them all the time. But they're seeing this idealized picture.
Yeah. So it sounds like that with the use of technology,
Yeah.
really allows someone to be present in one place but emotionally present somewhere else.
Exactly.
And functional.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And in fact now in many ways you can do it for free, right, through different ways that it doesn't cost you anything, and so you are really living a bimodal life.
Every time I go on a trip, I'm touching base with my wife
Daily,
nightly.
probably, yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter where I am. So I don't have that distance factor in the same way. Now, clearly it's different from being there face to face and physically present, but when my heart's broken and I want to pour it out to somebody, I pour it out to my wife.
Sure.
And that's good and right, but if I'm a single person and I'm pouring out to my family or my friends back home instead of learning how to pour out among national church members, that means they don't see that piece of me.
Well,
And they don't really know me.
So how then will technology shape missions the next decade or two? What is there any sense you have of what that might look like?
I have a fear that those that travel from one place to another and don't lose their home roots and don't grow new roots in the situation, it's going to be a year here, a year there, a year here, a year there, and they won't have potentially they won't even have the capacity to stay 25 years in a place because they're never deeply rooted in
sure.
that place.
Wow.
I would like to say that's a fear that I've seen happen in some instances. It's not necessarily pervasive, but technology opens the door for that.
It does happen, sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So why is cross-cultural missions, particularly in light of what we've just talked about with technology and the changes, still important today?
I don't see Jesus rescinding the Great Commission. That hasn't happened. At least it hasn't. I haven't seen it happen. And sometimes people are saying now that maybe flex the question a little bit. There are so many missionaries now from majority world countries. They're coming to the U.S. They're going all over the world, and far more missionaries outside of the U.S. and Europe than come from those places. But the vantage point is a church that's not sending out people is a church that's in process of dying. Now, a brand new church even still needs to have that orientation. When are we going to be sending out our own people? And they might go to the next village. They might go to the next country. They might fly across the ocean. That's immaterial, but are we sending people out because that's a sign of vitality in a church? And so cross-cultural missions, even if you've long been a receiving country, I think one of the most vital lessons you can give is that you're able to motivate, to get people to the stage where they know God is calling me to serve in the next village. You know, from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth, that can be reproduced in every church on the planet.
So we've talked a little bit about some of the concerns looking forward into, with the use of technology and so forth, not getting rooted into a community. What are some of the more promising trends that you see in missions today?
Migration, whether forced or not, for several reasons. Sometimes it's students who come to a European country in America, to the United States to study. When they're dislocated like that, they're open to new things. they don't have to defend Islam. They don't have to defend their former faith, whether the Buddhist or Hindu. They're open to new experiences and new possibilities. And that's why we have a number of ministries doing outreach on university campuses to try and meet that need. But also, I want to be careful how I say this, because people who are broken and who are fleeing as refugees, they're still migrants. And they're dislocated from their homes. And it's many in horribly brutal situations, and there the gospel can meet their needs as well. So there's opportunity. So, and I'll add to that, the final mix as part of the migration is that Christians are leaving and going elsewhere. And whether it's for economic purposes, whether it's the refugees, whether it's for educational purposes, they carry their faith with them. And so that is a wonderful global trend. We're living at, from my vantage point, probably the most important time since the first century, and certainly the most exciting time, because now I've got global sisters and brothers who partner with me. I'm hoping that 10 years from now, we'll be saying America is number 2 or number 3 or number 4 in sending missions. Not because Americans are stopped going in mission, but because other countries are providing more missionaries than we are, because they've got the passion and the zeal. I would love to see China be the number 1 mission sending agency or missionary sending country in the world. I would like to see India be number 2. I'm just going by population numbers. I'd like to see Nigeria be up there as well too. And not because we've lost our zeal, but because they have their own. And they own it themselves without us trying to get them to own it.
I've read a handful of articles about this migrant population coming with their, whatever their particular religious affiliation is. They come to a new country, they come to faith, but then they go and return back to their home country. Is that something you've seen? Do you think that's a trend that may
I think it's a trend that's going to
materialize?
continue. Yeah, you've got a lot of people who come to, say, the Ivies, or they come to the Oxfords and the Cambridges, and they come to these incredible universities. In part, they already have a skill set as a leader. In part, they've got the intellectual capacity to come. So when they head back home, they move into leadership. And to the extent that they have come to faith, they're occupying top echelon roles in their society. I would love to think there's opportunity for influence. Now, sometimes it's hidden, sometimes it's more open, but there still is opportunity that's there. And that's the type of thing that God has been doing in wonderful ways. So many people criticize the 1800 colonial missionary movement, but it generated this massive church around the world today. Despite us making mistakes, God used it in an unbelievable ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, the best is yet to come, hopefully.
I agree.
Hopefully.
I agree. Yeah.
So let's shift a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about leadership. For leaders who are building a multicultural team, what advice would you give them when they are first starting to build that team?
Give space for your teammates to learn how to be themselves in the new team. Focus on a direction that you're going to create what might be called a third way. In other words, your culture should not be only the culture of the leader, only the culture of the dominant members of the team, but it should, if it's in a country and the majority are nationals of that country, yes, it should take on characteristics of that particular country's culture. But if it's a multinational team working in a different country, you're going to develop your own team culture. You don't have a choice on that. And so creating space and opportunities, and as a leader, finding resources that would help you, help me if I'm one of your team members, both be an American but also shift into this third model that's different from you and different from me, but is a space where we can work together.
Joins together, sure.
Yeah, and the challenge with those teams is as the team members change, the team culture sometimes needs to change as well too. And at the very least, we argue against stereotypes, but stereotypes often are based on realities. And if you, at the very least, understand how your stereotypes drive how you handle your teammates, you can learn how to become a better teammate by addressing those stereotypes, wrestling with them.
Yep.
To what extent are they true? To what extent are they completely
Sure,
false?
sure.
You know?
You know, it's been my experience that when you bring people from different cultures together and put them in a team, that conflict is inevitable.
Yes.
So what advice would you have for the leader who's leading a multicultural team where conflict has emerged? What advice could you give that leader to manage their way through that experience?
Just dominate the team and fix it.
Well, exercise of power.
Well, and I'd say the first thing for the leader might be, to the best of your ability, avoid getting defensive. Because sometimes leaders feel vulnerable when there's conflict on the team because they feel, I'm a failure as a leader. And that conflict does provide opportunity, but it can be a hard opportunity. It can be a severe opportunity for growth on all sides. But I would say the leader has a particular responsibility to understand conflict styles and how culture drives the style of conflict.
Each culture would have maybe a different way of dealing with
a different way,
culture
and there are major kind of paradigms of that, and major ways of negotiating. And sometimes the cultural differences are just going to be so strong, you're not going to resolve it. You might have to find ways to give people space. You might have to have people reassigned to different teams. There's no single solution to it, but if you as a leader take the time to understand how people fight in other cultures. And sometimes that's an exercise, and as long, it can be kept kind of theoretical so it's less threatening. Dave, how do people fight in Scandinavian backdrop of your background of living in the United States? What, and do they avoid it altogether? Do they go at it?
I think
how do they handle
for
it?
most people, it's natural to want to avoid conflict.
Yeah.
But as we avoid it, it just becomes more complex. And I think that would be true universally with any culture.
And when it goes underground within the team, it becomes corrosive.
Yeah, very destructive.
And I've heard a saying, and I've never been able to verify it statistically, but 1/3 of the mission force spends most of its time dealing with the second third of the mission force, and the third third of the mission force actually does the work. Now, that's a sad number, but it's kind of an adage that I've heard.
But it may be true, though.
Yeah, and you see team conflict, even on monocultural teams, is a challenge when living in a new setting.
Is there an example you could give us of a team leader who was able to resolve a conflict in a healthy way? Is there anything that would come to mind?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot right now.
I am, aren't I?
think,
That's what friends do with each other. They put them on the spot, and they.
Okay, and I'll tell a story on myself then. And it wasn't as much conflict with another person, it was conflict with an idea. When I arrived in Kenya to teach, the first principal of the school was an American, and he required everyone to read this book called Dress for Success. And it was a book with dress codes of how to dress well, but it was a thoroughly American and preppy American book. And I fought against it. I said, no, I'm not going to read that book. Now, my wife would tell you that fashion and I are not in the same library together, not alone on the same page. And part of my fighting perhaps was defensiveness. Part of it was principled. And finally, we had a second American principal, but he was an interim. We were waiting for a Ugandan to come in and become principal. And he said, okay, I agree with you, but let's wait and let's let the new boss make the decision rather than me and him coming in with a decision already made. I thought that was a wise procedure it took. And so the new boss came and he said, you're right, we don't need to read that, but you have to wear a tie every day because we have to dress our best for God. And I said, okay. And that's what I did. That's what I did. So, and it wasn't it's not really a conflict that was a battle, but it was resolving an issue that I was the person generating the issue.
Exactly. It brought it to a positive conclusion.
And I realized I needed to, in that case, I needed to say, okay, God has called you and put you in this place. I don't like wearing ties every day, but you know what? I can suffer for Jesus by wearing a tie every day, right?
Yep.
You notice I don't have one on now.
Neither do I. So we're
good to go.
We're good to go. So for each person, each person has their own set of values. Every team has a set of values. Cultures have a sets of values. What are some of the tools that leaders can acquire to better understand the values of their cross-cultural, multicultural team?
Unfortunately, when you ask a teacher that, those kind of tools are books or workshops or things like that. There are good workshops available, at least in the United States. I don't know about the European scene because it's not my area where I understand, but a book I have students read in my classes it's a workbook. It's called Figuring Foreigners Out. The author is Craig Storti, S-T-O-R-T-I, and he walks through basic cultural values and then gives you vignettes. He gives you little stories and he asks for you to think through what cultures are likely driving it. And thankfully, at the end of the book, he's got his understanding of what was driving it. And students have found this book the most down-to-earth, practical tool that they've had to be able to understand other cultures and how things work out. I would say a second set of tools is learning how to observe. When we go into a new setting and something upsets us, the ability to stand back and ask why. Why is that upsetting? And usually the answer is obvious, because he's an idiot, because she did something wrong. Okay, step back from there. Why was it wrong? And again, a very simple illustration. My first week in Swaziland, I went up to a small kiosk and I said, "You don't have peanut butter, do you?" And he answered, "Yes." And I said, "I would like a jar of peanut butter." He said, "We don't have any peanut butter." And I said, "What do you mean you don't have any peanut butter?" You said, "Yes." He said, I said, "Yes, we do not have peanut butter." He was answering my double negative question in a way that made sense to his understanding of English, and that was the local use of the term. So I was the one who was wrong, but I was kind of violated by that. In a simple little way. I was a week into the country. I was just learning the process of figuring, and it just took me completely by surprise, and I got really angry. I didn't say anything, but I was burning on the inside. Once I stepped back and understood what was taking place, this is not his fault. This is me not knowing the culture and the setting. And so the ability to observe, to step back, to think about why something happened. And I would say the third tool would be become a lifelong learner. One of the things I did in Kenya was I got a hold of locally published novels. And I would read them, not necessarily understanding a lot of what was taking place, but knowing that because it's published, it means there's an audience for it. Because there's an audience for it, it's addressing issues that Kenyans are asking. And I wanted to get it from their point of view rather just from my point of view. So become a student of local literature as much as possible. From folk stories to classic novels, if they have them, become a student of that, and it gives you the chance to see things from the insider's point of view.
That is a great suggestion.
Yeah,
you know, back to what you said before, that was really good. One thing you said before was interesting to me, is when we encounter something that is different, we have this tendency to assign a negative attribution to that, right? So there's something wrong with this person who's selling me peanut butter. Doesn't he understand what I'm saying? What's wrong with him? Well, how do you overcome some of those things? What is there? Is it just maturity, or is it just
some stumbling, some maturity, having people around you who can give you perspectives? And I would say maybe a fourth point on learning cultural values, find a person indigenous to the setting who becomes an informant for you, a cultural informant. Ask them questions. And the attitude, the posture you need to take is remind them, I'm a baby here. I don't know how to live here. I don't even know how to ask a double negative question. And would you help me? And that's a type of invitation that's, you know, and something happened and I don't understand what it is. So I asked a Swazi, how do you know if somebody is really saying yes when they're praying to receive Christ? Because in Swaziland, for you and I to look each other in the eyes right now, it's a power game. And you know, our heads are level with each other, but I'm just a little bit older than you, so you would not be looking me straight in the eyes all the time.
Yeah.
And you would have to show deference and respect. And I wondered how, when I share the 4 laws, I was on staff with Crew, people always said yes. They always wanted to receive Christ. But they never came for follow-up. So I was wondering what's really happening. And so I started observing how Swazis shared faith with other Swazis. And I noticed they didn't look them straight in the eyes. They're always looking to the side of the head or the other side of the head. And I thought, oh, because when I look somebody in the eyes, that's a power game. And they're not saying yes to Christ, they're saying yes to my power. So I started looking at the side of the head, and it felt really weird at the beginning, not looking right at the person. But suddenly I found they were being more open with me. They weren't just saying yes to everything I said. And so, you know, watching others do it, knowing there's something wrong with this, knowing that eye contact is wrong, and putting pieces together and finally saying, okay, in my one-on-one evangelism, when I look people in the eyes in Swaziland, that's a power game. And that's a game that they won't give me what's really in their heart then. They give me what they feel my power deserves. And so they want to respect me by not saying no to my power. But if I didn't play that power game through looking straight at them, they could be more open and honest with me.
Different cultures, right?
Different cultures,
different values,
just things like eye
being aware
contact
of
and
those
body
things.
posture. Yeah.
So did you naturally begin to understand these things, being aware of your own value system?
There's nothing
Is there-
natural about it, Dave. You have to consciously do it. You learned, and I learned my culture by growing up in it. And you know, I mentioned what we eat for breakfast. So my children would come down. I say, "What do you want to eat?" And we have cereal, we have toast, we have eggs. We have all these things. Without thinking about it, I'm training my children that they are the agents who make the choice. In Africa, they just put the food before you. They don't learn that they are independent individuals who are required to make choices. That choice is made for them. And so all those kind of things that we unconsciously pick up growing up, it's called the process of enculturation. We don't have that. So when we go to a new setting, we have the wrong set of social skills. And I know how to act like an American, but I don't know how to act like a Swazi. I don't know how to act like a Kenyan. I don't know how to act like a Pole. I don't know how to act like a German. And the difference for me is I know I don't know how to act that way. And so usually when I'm in a new setting, I realize I'm missing 90% of what's going on. Even though I'm a cross-cultural observer, even though I've written on this, even though I've done it, I know when I'm in a new setting, I don't know what's going on, and that gives me a posture of I would like to think I'm a little bit less self-confident, and I'm willing to listen and learn more.
So when we were talking earlier about rootedness, so for a leader, for a missionary going to a new community, is part of the rootedness also then becoming part of the culture?
Absolutely.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, deep friendships within the culture, with people who trust you and people you trust, and those are the types of friends that will help you put on new skin. You know, Africans have a statement, you brought us the gospel, the bread of life you gave to us, but you kept it in the wrapper, and you made us eat the wrapper. Well, what does it mean to take it out of the wrapper with a local brother or sister in ways that you're both eating from the bread of life, but I'm eating it as an American, she is eating it as a Pole. How does that happen?
So in your case, you would never be a Kenyan, but you could live and respect the Kenyan culture and be a part of it. And though you will not be Kenyan, you become part of the culture of the Kenyans.
And I'm called what's a third culture person.
Yes.
So I'm somewhere in between those two. So actually, when I go to Asia to speak, when I go to Europe to speak, I have what I call my Africa switch. So a decade of service in Africa, I learned not to be a Kenyan, but to become as a Kenyan, to use Paul's word. And when I go to serve in Asia, I found it's better to become as a Kenyan than to be an American there. And it just takes, but it takes a long time. You know, learning language can be real hard, but learning culture is even harder.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I've known people who know the language, but have not learned how to behave well. They haven't learned the new social skill set that's necessary for the culture.
Fluent in language and influent
Yes,
in
yes,
culture.
yes,
That's the word.
yes.
So let me shift a little bit again.
Okay.
Talking about, is there a general American leadership style that you could explain to someone from a different culture?
If someone from a different culture asked me what American leadership styles are like, I would say, here are some general rules of thumb. Americans are very pragmatic. And so our leadership tends to focus on pragmatic issues. Dare I say it, stereotypes, unlike the German, they don't want a prolegomena as a foundation to understanding the theory of leadership. They just want to know what works.
Yes.
So they're very pragmatic in that sense. Americans can be driven by steps to success, keys to growth, and we've already mentioned that. You give me these 4 points, I know what to do, I'll go off and do them. And Americans tend to want to do that and implement. Americans want to foster in the team an attitude of independence rather than dependence. We think of dependence as an unhealthy thing. And in between those two is something called interdependence, but Americans tend not to want to foster that. It doesn't mean they're not good teammates, and it doesn't mean they don't want a team to cohere, but I was born and raised to be an independent individualist, and I carry that with me. And they don't always understand that it takes a long time of doing things together for relationships to gel. You know, an American, my daughter might come home from school and say, "Dad, I met a new best friend today." And a week later, "Dad, I met a new best friend today." For many parts of the world, that friendship, you never meet a new best friend in one day. It might take 5 years or 10 years before you could say somebody is your best friend. And part of it is our mobile lifestyle. Part of it is we're a nation of migrants. And we carry that orientation with us. And Americans do tend to think they know all the right answers. And American leaders don't always know how to ask for help from their subordinates.
And so what would you say then to an American leader? Are there certain leadership qualities that you'd say maybe you should tone those down a little bit and maybe expand in some other areas?
Yeah.
You know, would just a handful, what would they be?
Be passionate, but be empathetic. Cast a vision, but watch the reaction. Now, again, stereotypes. Asians are trained to respect a person who's in charge. And they want you to act as though you are in charge. So they want you to lead and they want to just follow. But if you ask them an open-ended question, it flusters them because they're looking for cues from you as to what type of answer you want. And if you're giving them cues in a certain direction, they will answer in that direction because that's how they respect you. So you have to know, as an American, that there's probably, especially early in the team, you don't know what's going on. And as long as you know that, you can begin to learn what's going on. But it's hard when you're the leader because you feel you have a set of responsibilities. When I'm traveling overseas, it's very rare to hear the word American and humble in the same sentence without something negative in between them. Americans need to learn we don't have all the answers. We also have a very strong can-do. It ties into the pragmatism. We can fix this. And that's what I help other people learn. Americans are trying to be good leaders, but they're doing it in a way that's culturally viable for them.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Well, now we're coming to our conclusion. And you spent 10 years in Kenya, 30 years teaching missions and intercultural competencies and education. You're one of the foremost missiologists in the world.
I won't answer that one.
Well, we both know you are. What do you know now that you wish you would have known as a first-year missionary
Yeah.
in Kenya? What is
Yeah.
if you just had this one clue, things might have gone differently or better?
It's okay to make mistakes. I'm a performance-driven person. I want to do things right. That gets in the way of language learning. I don't want to say things unless I know
Sure.
I've got them right. It made it harder for me to be a language learner because I was afraid of making mistakes. Made it hard for me to be a leader because I was afraid of making mistakes. And that's part of my family history, and I carried that history with me when I went overseas. So I wish I had known that not just in my head, because if you had asked me, is it okay to make mistakes, I would have said yes, but my heart didn't believe it. And so that's, if there's one thing that would have benefited me. I took a test when I was in seminary, and one question, trace the theme of discipleship failure in the Gospel of Mark. And I counted 18 times in 12 chapters that the disciples failed Jesus. And that ministered to my soul because they just blew it every chapter, every chapter they blew it. Jesus got exasperated with them, but these were the people he used to turn the world upside down. Go therefore and fail in peace. I wish I had really understood that.
Boy, if you think about your own life, especially you and I being about the same age and looking
Right.
back, we've realized that our greatest areas of growth have been a result of
Come through failure.
failure. It has in most every part of our lives.
And hurt and pain that comes with that.
Yep.
And I want to avoid pain and you want to avoid pain. But learn how to embrace failure. Don't fail on purpose, but learn how to embrace it when it comes.
Yeah, fear of failure is paralyzing, but in fact that's the place that we learn and we grow and we change. And that's a good final word. That's good.
Thanks.
Thank you, Scott.